If you are sued for eviction for unpaid rent, if your landlord files an eviction case claiming that you have not paid rent, we're going to talk about what you need to do to respond in court. There are two main things that you have to do in court to respond. First, you have to file a written response, or written or typed, but you have to file a response to state the reasons why you do not believe you should be evicted. And those reasons, of course, will depend on what your landlord has alleged as the basis for eviction. And we're talking about eviction for unpaid rent. So you will write down or type the reasons why you do not believe that you should be evicted for your landlord's allegation that rent has not been paid. Your response may be that you did pay the rent that your landlord says was not paid. Your response may be that you don't owe as much as your landlord has alleged you owe. Your response may be that you didn't pay the rent and it's because your landlord hasn't fixed things. Whatever the reason is, whatever reason you feel you should not be evicted is what you need to write in your written response that will be filed with the court. The other main thing that you have to do in a case that is based on the allegation of unpaid rent, you must also deposit in the court registry any amount of unpaid rent. So if you agree that there is some amount of rent that has not been paid, you must pay that into the court registry when you file your written response. So just to take an easy example, let's say your landlord files an eviction case and claims that you didn't pay the rent for January, and let's say it's now January 20th. If that's true, that your January rent hasn't been paid, then when you file your response to explain why you shouldn't be evicted for that, why your rent wasn't paid or any other reason, you would also have to deposit into the court registry the January rent. Now you have to do that when you file the response, and then you also have to continue depositing the rent each month as it comes due as long as the case is open. So in that example, you would deposit your January rent when you file your response. You would also deposit your February rent when it comes due, assuming the case is still open in court. Deposit your February rent in court as well, and you do that each month as long as the case is going. Now there's an important question that comes up often. What if you disagree with the amount that your landlord says is due? And this can happen in several ways. Let's say your landlord filed a case and alleges, again, that your January rent was not paid. Let's say your landlord alleges that the rent is $500 a month, and you didn't pay the $500 for January. Well, if you say that the rent is actually only $400 a month, you have to take an extra step. In your written response that you file, you have to file what's called a motion to determine rent. It's in the same document as your general response, your reasons why you shouldn't be evicted, but it's a different section and it needs to go at the top. The very first section of your response needs to be called the motion to determine rent. And in that motion, in that section of the response, you have to explain why your landlord is wrong about the amount of rent that is due, and you have to explain what the correct amount is, and then you're going to have to attach to that motion some kind of documentation that supports your position. So for example, if your landlord says the rent is $500 a month, you say no, it's only $400 a month because we had this written agreement that there would be a $100 a month discount for some reason. You would have to explain that, and you would have to attach to your response the documentation that shows that it's only $400 a month. So in the motion to determine rent, you are asking the judge to determine the correct amount that you need to deposit into the court registry. That's what the motion to determine rent does. You're saying you disagree with the amount your landlord says is owed. You think it's a different amount, and you're asking the judge to determine what amount you need to pay into the court registry. So just to recap again, you're filing a written response to explain why you shouldn't be evicted, and then you're depositing into the court registry any rent that has not been paid. Or if you disagree with the amount that your landlord says is owed and you need the judge to determine the amount that you're to pay into the court, then file the motion to determine rent with your response. The only time that you don't have to either deposit unpaid rent or file a motion to determine rent is if the defense that you're raising in your response is that you paid all of the rent that your landlord says you didn't pay. If your defense to the case is basically your landlord is wrong and you paid all of the rent that he says or she says wasn't paid, then you don't have to deposit that rent. You don't have to pay your rent again into the court. But if you're not saying that you've already paid all of the rent, then you do have to either deposit it or file the motion to determine rent and ask the judge to tell you how much you have to pay into the court. Let's talk about the time frame. How much time do you have after you get served with the eviction summons to file your response and deposit any unpaid rent? You only have 5 business days after you get served with the court papers. So 5 business days, that means not including weekends or holidays. 5 business days after you get served with the court papers, you have to file your response and deposit any unpaid rent. Once you do that, you need to be checking your mail and watching closely for a notice from the court that will tell you if there's a hearing set in the case, if you're required to deposit rent, but you'll need to be watching because after your deadline for filing the response is when your landlord and the court will take their next steps.